Have you ever witnessed a person being turned away by the whole world just because of a false accusation that they have no way to explain? Have you ever wondered if one day you were forced to leave everything behind, carrying only fear and empty hands? How would you continue living? In the middle of the wild mountains of the West, a man who had lived quietly for many years suddenly received a rejected bride. Her face was covered with an ugly bag. On her wrist were only traces of years of damage. People said she was unsuitable, unworthy, should not have a decent name. But he brought her back with a simple choice, believing in the slight tremor in the footsteps of a desperate person. If it were you, would you have the courage to open your heart to a stranger who is trembling before life? And is it possible that the encounter that we think is a mistake is the door that leads us back to ourselves? We invite you to join us on their deepest, quietest healing journey. If you find this story worth listening to, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying us. That afternoon, the Montana sky was a cold, icy gray. The wind blew down from the Highwood Range, carrying the scent of snow and the scent of burnt pine. Ash Willow Junction, the sparse little town nestled at the foot of the mountains, seemed to shrink from the chill that was settling in at the end of the day. At that moment, an old wagon clattered into town. The wheels scraped against the hard ground, creating a dry, heavy sound that cut through the otherwise silent afternoon. People lining the main road began to turn to look, their eyes following the wagon as if it were an omen. On that cart was a woman with a burlap sack over her head, a rope tied twice around her neck, holding the heavy, rough sack down to her chest. She sat stiffly, her hands in her lap, trembling slightly with each jolt of the wheels on the ground. The sight sent a wave of whispers across the street. It's her. She was sent back from 3 other towns. I heard she's dangerous, insane, or something. A man shook his head, smiling faintly. A mail-order bride who was rejected 3 times. Must not be the normal type. The gossip, the suspicious looks, the spit on the ground, all of it seemed to not touch the woman. She remained still, as if the world around her had lost its meaning. The wagon stopped in front of the post office and a man appeared on the steps. Elias Hartwell. Elias, 58, is a true mountain man in the Western sense. A man of few words, slow of life, broad-shouldered and accustomed to winters longer than summers. His hair is silver in strands, but his eyes remain as calm as an autumn lake. He was a Union cavalryman in the war. He lost his wife and son in a landslide. He almost lost himself in the face of such great pain. So, Elias chose to retreat to the mountains, over 6,000 feet, where the wind and silence coexisted with humans for many seasons. The men built their own cabins, lit their own fires, prepared their own meals. No one to talk to, no one to walk with. A life not given up, but left alone. And today, he came here to pick up a woman he knew only from a few short ads. He signed because he thought he needed another hand in the cold cabin, someone to share dinner with. Not to expect love, but before his eyes now was an image so heavy it was hard to breathe. The coachman threw down a small bag and a crumpled piece of paper. Elias picked it up. On the paper were 3 lines: rejected, no refunds, handle with caution. He finished reading and was silent for a few seconds, not because of fear, but because of love. He looked at the woman in the sack. He couldn't see her face, couldn't tell what her eyes looked like. He could only see her hands, thin, pale, and shaking, but not from cold, from the fear that comes from someone who has been treated so harshly. Elias approached the car, step by step, slow and steady. He held out his hand, his palm broad and rough from years of carving wood. "Ma'am, if you want to get off the car, please hold my hand." No one laughed, no one teased. No one had the courage to break the silence. The woman tilted her head slightly as if she had not heard clearly. But then she sat up slightly, her hand trembling as she placed it in Elias's. It was a light, loose grip, as if she were afraid she would hurt him with her own hand. Elias helped her down to the ground. She stood, stiff as a log. A thick brown cloak covered her lower body caked with road grime. The rope tied around the burlap sack over her head was an undeserved mark of shame. A strong wind blew through the square. She took a half step back, as if pushed by the wind, but Elias gently grabbed her elbow. "It's okay, I'll take you home." She nodded slightly, causing the sack to shake slightly, the rope rubbing against her neck with a dry sound. They left the town, watched with half pity and half curiosity by the townspeople. Elias's horse trotted down the mountain road, each step leaving deep tracks in the cold, late-season earth. The woman sat behind him in utter silence, silence even quieter than the wind. Elias could feel the tension in her hands gripping the saddle. He knew that fear. He had felt it in the war, in the long, sleepless nights after his family's accident. A person shaking like that can't be dangerous. At about 5,000 feet, the wind became colder, and Elias spoke for the first time. "Are you cold? I have a blanket under the saddle if you need one." She did not answer, but he saw her shoulders tremble. He pulled the blanket back and draped it over her, careful not to touch her face where it was hidden by the sack. He didn't want to scare her any further. As darkness began to fall over Highwood Range, Elias's little cabin came into view. Sloping wooden roof, low chimney, yellow light pouring from a small window. The horse stopped. The woman did not dismount immediately. She remained still for a long time, as if gathering all her courage to set foot in this strange place. Elias reached behind, gently reaching out his hand. "No one here is going to hurt you. This is my home. If you want it, it can be your home too." The woman took a deep breath through the sackcloth, a deep breath like someone who had just gone through a lifetime of fear. She gave Elias her hand. It was cold. He helped her down. She stood in the doorway of the cabin, her shoulders hunched, as if afraid of something unknown. Elias said, his voice warm but simple, "When you're ready, we'll take that sack off." The wind stopped. The mountain fell silent for a moment. It was as if nature itself was waiting for the story to begin. The cabin door slid shut behind him, leaving the stillness of the Montana mountains chilled. The light from the fireplace cast a soft yellow hue, softening the shadows that filled the corner of the room. Elias set his gloves down on the table, his eyes on the woman standing near the fireplace, as if examining the warm wisps rising from the flames. Marin still didn't say a word. Her body was trembling slightly, not so much from the cold as from the feeling of being out of place in this unfamiliar space. The burlap sack over her head remained, creating a heavy silence in the small room. Elias felt he had to be careful with his every move. He understood the fear of those who had been judged so much. He placed a bowl of warm water on the table near the fireplace and spoke softly like the sound of a broken fire. "Marin, no one here will hurt you. When you feel safe enough, we can take the condom off. There's no need to rush." She pressed her hands together, a simple gesture, but one filled with layers of emotion. Elias recognized it, the way a person protected themselves with the smallest of gestures. Marin inhaled slowly. Her voice was so soft he had to lean in to hear. "Are you sure? You want to see me?" "Yes," Elias replied, his eyes never leaving her. "Nothing would change my mind about bringing you here." Marin paused, her shoulders hunched for a moment as she remembered being sent back within hours, labeled, treated as defective. The feeling sent a chill down her spine like icy water. She reached out to touch the rope around her neck. The movement was slow and shaky. Elias stepped closer, but stopped far enough away that she wouldn't feel pressured. "I can give you a hand if you want." Marin didn't flinch, nor did she nod, but her hands seemed to fall lightly in acceptance. Elias slowly untied the knot. The stiff rope creaked softly like the crack of a pine branch. As the sacking loosened, Marin stepped back, as if to preserve one last bit of protection. Then she let go. The bag slid down. No one in the cabin said a word. Marin stood before Elias, her amber hair flowing down to her shoulders, a few strands slightly tousled by the long wind. Her face was delicate, but marked by time and miles, no longer young, but beautiful in a way that was enduring and gentle. Her blue-gray eyes regarded Elias warily. But after the first moment, Elias saw an old wound there that had not yet healed. He did not gape in surprise as the townspeople imagined. It was not her beauty that stopped him. It was the fragility and strength in her eyes. "Only a person who has suffered a lot of damage has such a look," Elias said slowly. "You look like someone who has been through many storms, but still standing. That is more precious than anything else." Marin blinked. A tear slid down silently, not a tear of pain, but a slight glimmer of being seen for the first time after being treated as a shadow for so long. She turned her face away, as if afraid of appearing too vulnerable in front of the man she had just met. But Elias did not show any sign of discomfort. He handed her the soft cloth. She took it, her hand trembling slightly. "May I ask?" Elias chose his words carefully. "Why did they put a sack over your head when they brought you here?" As soon as the question was finished, Marin clenched her handkerchief. She knew she would have to tell her story at some point, but she didn't want to go back to the place that had worn her out. A sigh escaped her chest. "They said I was unfit to be any man's wife, that I brought with me troubles that no one wanted to touch." Her voice was small but clear. "Is that true?" Elias asked, without a trace of bitterness. "No," Marin replied, and for the first time, her voice held a certain firmness. "I just have nothing left to return to, and no one will believe me unless I run away." Elias put his hands on the back of the chair and nodded slightly. "I don't need to know everything right now. Just know that you're not considered trouble here." Marin's eyes wavered. Something warmed the cold, heavy air. She nodded, a silent thank you. A moment of silence passed. The fire in the hearth turned a deep red. Elias added more wood to the fire and went to the old chest. He took out a brown woolen scarf, hand-knitted. The wool wrapped tightly the way mountain men do to keep warm when the wind changes. Marin hesitated as he placed the towel in her hand. "Wear it if you want. The wind is blowing strong from the north side these days." She stroked the rough, warm wool. The feeling stirred her heart, as if he were telling her through the scarf that she was worthy of protection. As Marin sat down in a chair by the fireplace, Elias watched her discreetly. He saw the wariness still in the way she hugged her arms and flinched whenever the flames crackled. But he saw something else too. The weariness of her long years had left her with little strength to conceal herself. He poured her some warm water, mixed with honey. "This helps soothe my throat." Marin took it with both hands. Warmth spread through her cold knuckles. She drank in small sips, her breathing slowing. After a few minutes, she said, "You didn't ask me if I intended to leave, because I think if someone comes this far, they have nowhere to run," Elias replied slowly. Then he looked at her, his eyes steady. "And I believe you deserve a fresh start." Marin turned to look at the fireplace, the firelight reflecting in her blue-gray eyes. She whispered, so softly it was almost as if she were talking to herself, "Maybe I also want to start over. It's just, I don't dare believe it yet." Elias nodded slowly. "I do. Today may not be easy for you, but tomorrow will be better. And then a few more days. The mountains heal, Marin. They are patient." No one said another word. The atmosphere became peaceful, though the secrets between them were still waiting to be revealed. Marin looked around the cabin. No luxury, no extraneous furniture, but every object bore the mark of time and the meticulous hand of a man who had lived for many years in solitude. She knew she was on the threshold of a new journey. She also knew that it would not be easy. But that first night in the cabin, for the first time in months of running, she felt a warmth that resembled hope. There was a special peace in the cabin at Highwood Range, the kind of peace that made you hear the pine trees crackle when they met the warmth from the fireplace. It was a peace unlike any other place Marin had ever been. It didn't force people to be happy, nor did it force them to be strong. It just sat there, like the silent mountains, waiting for people to come and find themselves. In her early days at the cabin, Marin spoke little. She moved cautiously, as if the slightest step would send her past catching up with her. Her small movements betrayed the strain of years of living under scrutiny. A person considered a burden learns to shrink to the point of almost disappearing. Elias knew it from her first touch on the saddle. He tried not to exert any pressure. His every word, every step was as gentle as the way a mountaineer treats a herd of deer in the cold. One day in the cabin, when the firelight cast its softest light, Elias placed a few simple objects on the table: a small knife, some pine wood, and a worn notebook. He opened the notebook, turning the pages as if he were turning over years of solitude. "I have a habit of writing down what I learn from the mountains," Elias said, his voice even and warm. Marin sat on the edge of the chair, his hands clasped together. "What did you learn most?" Elias looked at her for a long time and then replied, "That silence is not sometimes loneliness. It is something that helps people hear their own hearts again. Marin bowed her head, feeling the words touch something deeper in her chest. She was used to heavy silence, the kind that covered her life like a layer of dust that could not be shaken off. But here, the silence was like a woolen blanket draped over her shoulders on a windy night. No longer sharp, no longer cold as before. Elias pointed to the pieces of wood. When my head gets too heavy, I whittle a little, just whittling wood, for no purpose. It keeps my hands working and my mind calm. Marin reached out and lightly touched a round piece of wood. It felt rough but warm. I've never done anything like this before. You don't need to be skillful. Just let your hands move the way they want. Elias handed her the small, worn knife. Marin's hand shook slightly, but she took it. Placing her palm on the wood, she began to peel away thin layers. The wood fell to the table as softly as snow on the ground. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders softening. It was as if, for the first time, her body had been allowed to relax. "Why did you choose to live here?" Marin asked after a long while. "I didn't choose," Elias replied. "I came here when there was no place quiet enough to help me stand up." That answer made Marin look up at him, not out of curiosity, but out of understanding, because she felt the same way, the feeling of someone forced to leave before they were completely crushed. Elias's eyes, though strong, still showed old wounds. He did not elaborate, but Marin sensed an indelible loss in the man's life. She was not the only one learning to survive in the mountains. In the days that followed, cabin life took on a rhythm of its own. Marin gradually got used to small tasks. She added firewood, washed a few utensils, and tidied up the kitchen corner, which had been a mess after years of being run by a man alone. Little by little, she touched the space, as if trying to find something that belonged to her. Elias did not stop her. He watched from a distance, letting her choose what she wanted to do. But whenever Marin flinched, he stepped forward as lightly as someone setting up a camp stake in the wind. "Let me do the heavy lifting," he said, watching her struggle to carry the rather large bucket. Marin quickly backed away. "I don't want to be a bother." Elias shook his head very slightly. "You don't mind?" "I'm used to this." There was no grace in his words. It was simply the words of one sharing a burden with another who had grown accustomed to living in fear. Another day, Marin stood before a small window, looking out at the distant mountains. There were no towering cliffs like where she had lived, but the rolling hills that stretched to the horizon gave a strange sense of security. When the mountains stood still, one felt the world was less fierce. Elias came over and placed a new piece of wool on the sill. "You can use it to mend your coat. I see the shoulders are a little frayed." Marin touched the piece of wool. "I haven't sewn a shirt for anyone in years. I don't need a nice shirt, just a warm one." She smiled for the first time since arriving. It wasn't a perfect smile, but it softened her face like old sunlight. By the 7th day, Marin had grown accustomed to most of the cabin space, but some deeper feelings still lingered. Several times she flinched when Elias approached, though he always gave her a small warning so she wouldn't be caught off guard. That wariness was a scar from years of having her every move monitored. Elias understood that. He did not press her to tell the story, nor did he try to show pity. One evening, when the fire in the stove was only a low glow, Marin said slowly, "I was labeled insane. That's why they put a bag over my head. They thought it was safe." Elias did not interrupt. He waited for her to find a more complete way of speaking. "I'm not crazy." Marin's voice shook slightly. "I was just protesting, and they consider protest from a woman unacceptable." Elias put the piece of wood down on the table. "It is never wrong to fight back to protect yourself." Marin looked at him for a long time. "You don't know everything, and yet you believe me so quickly? I saw the way you trembled when you held the reins. The creator of chaos does not tremble like that." That simple sentence made Marin feel something she thought she had lost a long time ago, the feeling of being understood without having to explain too much. A long sigh escaped her chest, like the breath of someone beginning to remove an old layer of armor that had been weighing down for too long. That night, Elias placed a small gift on the table, a piece of pine wood carved into the shape of a leaf. "I saw you liked the color of pine, so I made this for you. It's not very pretty, but it belongs here." Marin took it. She ran her hand over the rough, warm surface. For once, the gift didn't make her worry about what she should do in return. It was simply a kind gesture. She looked at Elias, her voice low. "I don't know if I deserve your kindness." Elias smiled gently, his eyes calm as the mountainside after the rain. "Marin, sometimes you don't have to deserve kindness. You just have to be trying. That's enough." The words made Marin's throat tighten. The days in the small cabin had begun to heal some of her fears. But what touched her most was the calmness of the man standing before her. No pressure, no demands, just accompaniment. Marin knew full well that this would lead to bigger choices in the future. But for now, she just needed space to take a deep breath. Elias gave her that. In that moment, she felt like she no longer had to run. The days at Elias's cabin flowed at the natural rhythm of the mountains. Not too fast, not too slow, like the breath of streams flowing through crevices in the rocks. As Marin began to realize that she was no longer afraid of the wind, when the wooden door shook slightly, other emotions gradually emerged within her. It was not a clear happiness, but rather like a layer of snow slowly melting under a thin layer of sunlight. One day, Elias opened the back door of the cabin and told Marin to follow. The path leading up the mountainside was thick with pine needles, and the air was damp. Elias carried an old axe and some rough hide. He didn't say why, just gestured for Marin to follow behind him. She watched his every move, both worried and curious. Upon arriving, Elias stood before the trunk of a large pine tree, put down his axe, and turned to Marin. "If you want to regain control of your life, you can start with smaller things, like cutting down a tree branch." Marin paused. "You want me to hold the axe? If you want to try." There was no pressure in his voice, just a gentle suggestion. Marin raised her hand to take the axe. The blade was heavier than she expected. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted it, both from unfamiliarity and from fear of messing up. Elias stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the spot where the axe landed, never making her feel watched or judged. "Let your breath guide your hand," Elias said. "When you strike, don't think of yourself as stronger than anyone else. Just think of yourself as paving the way." Marin inhaled slowly. She raised the axe, ready to strike. The first blow wasn't hard, but it was enough to send the pine bark splintering. Elias nodded slightly. "That's good. You can do it." After years of being denied her powers, that simple statement warmed Marin's chest. Each subsequent swing of the axe was a little stronger. She felt her body move in a way she hadn't in a long time. The feeling was unfamiliar, but liberating. When the last branch fell, Marin stopped, her breath coming in gasps. She set down the axe, her hands shaking with exhaustion, but also with a kind of newfound pride. "I never thought I could do something like that." Elias looked at the branch that fell to the ground, then looked at Marin. "You don't know how strong you are, because no one has given you a chance to try." Marin bowed her head, feeling her chest tighten. She didn't reply, but it was clear enough in the silence between them. When they returned to the cabin, Marin sat at the table, her hands resting lightly on the wooden surface. Beside her was the wooden leaf Elias Whittle had given her. She turned it over and over, studying the delicate grain. "Do you have a family?" Marin asked. The question made the air in the room sink ever so slightly. Elias sat in the chair opposite, his hand touching the rim of his metal cup. He neither avoided nor answered immediately. His eyes looked out the window, where the high wood ranges stretched out in layers of blue-gray. "I did," Elias said after a moment. "My wife's name was Harriet. We had a son. He only lived a few years." Marin was silent, not because she was shy, but because she didn't want to interfere with the other person's pain. Elias's grief was deeper than he let on. Something in the way he spoke made her feel like there was a loss in his life that would never be named. "Accident?" she asked softly. "A section of the mountain collapsed after a heavy rain," Elias replied. "I was away from home. When I returned, everything was over." Marin clenched her hands together. "I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize. It's a matter of the mountains." There was no resentment in the answer, only acceptance tempered by time, an acceptance filled with resilience and loneliness. Elias smiled very slightly. "Loss brought me here. I thought silence was the only thing left. But then, you showed up in that wagon. I think maybe the mountains brought you here for a reason." Marin looked at him involuntarily, her eyes wavering. "Don't you think I'm a burden? If the mountains have brought you to this cabin door, You cannot be a burden, Elias replied. Marin turned the wooden leaf over again. It was strange how something so small could soften her heart. The tenderness did not weaken her, but made her want to tell more about herself. I ran away from where I was, Marin said, her voice soft, as if afraid of what might come back. I left not because I wanted to start a new life, but because if I stayed, I would break. Elias nodded slightly. You don't have to tell me now. When you're ready, I'll listen. Marin looked at him for a long moment, as if considering whether to trust him a little more. Then she placed the wooden leaf on the table, her voice low but clear. I want to believe you, Elias. He smiled, his eyes lighting up a little. Trust in small parts. Every mountain has to be climbed in sections. In the days that followed, Marin began to get used to stepping outside the cabin more. She learned to get used to the wind from the north slope, to fetch water from the nearby stream, to listen to the eagles soaring overhead without being startled. The pine-strewn path from the cabin to the clearing became a place she often stopped by when she needed to think. Elias watched the change in silence. He let Marin make her own way, only appearing when she needed more assurance in her steps. Her small moments made him realize that Marin's presence, even silent, warmed the cabin in ways he couldn't explain. One day, while they were drying the skins flat, Marin asked, Are you ever scared, Elias? Afraid of what? Afraid of starting over. Elias handed a piece of leather to the wind to dry, then turned to look at her. I was afraid for a long time, but one day I realized that fear is like the ice on a stream. It only melts when someone walks up and looks at the water underneath the ice. He paused, his eyes warm but unhurried. Now, I'm not afraid anymore. That sincerity made Marin feel something very strange. Not a hasty vibration, but a peace that made her heart no longer contract. It was as if Elias was building an invisible roof over her head, a shelter she didn't dare think she deserved. Sometime later, when they returned to the cabin, Marin noticed something new on the small wooden shelf. It was a block of pine wood carved into the shape of a mountain. The top was sharp, the bottom rounded. Marin picked it up. When did you do this? When you were walking along the pine forest. I thought it suited you better than the leaf. How compatible? Elias shrugged slightly. Because you are also climbing a mountain. Not a mountain of earth and rock, but a mountain in your heart. Marin squeezed the block of wood gently. His words made her heart vibrate like an old guitar string touched by the wind. Silent for a moment, she asked, If one day I tell you everything, will you be afraid of me? Elias replied immediately without hesitation. No, Marin, the only thing that scares me is that you won't give yourself a chance to live again. There was a long silence, but it was a beautiful silence, like the patches of unmelted snow on the edge of a mountain. Marin put the mountain block back on the shelf. She took a deep breath, feeling a little lighter, as if she had taken a few steps up the mountain Elias had spoken of. The wind from the north blew along the mountainside, carrying the familiar dampness of storm-damped earth. Elias was checking his traps at the edge of the woods when his eyes fell on a boot print sunk deep in the soft earth. It was neither his nor Marin's. It was larger, darker, and pointed straight up toward the cabin with an unmistakable intent. He looked closely. There was more than one mark. There were 3, spaced evenly in the manner of experienced horsemen and trackers. The mud was still raw at the edges, meaning they had not been there long. Elias's heart pounded in his chest. He understood immediately. The past that Marin had run away from so fearfully was coming to this place. He stood there for a long time. The wind blew through his silver hair, but did nothing to ease the chill that ran down his spine. Elias rarely worried, but this time he was really worried. Worried because the woman in the cabin could not take another blow. Worried because he knew the kind of person who left such a mark on the ground. Those boot prints don't belong to hunters. They're from bounty hunters. When Elias returned to the cabin, Marin was folding the woolen scarf he had given her a few days earlier. She looked up at his face, his pale eyes narrowing. What's the matter? Elias did not answer immediately. He hung his coat on a hook, stepped closer, and said softly, I saw strange footprints at the foot of the mountain. 3 people. It looks like they're coming this way. Marin stood up abruptly. The color drained from her face instantly. Her hands clenched reflexively. Her breathing became heavy. She clearly understood what it meant. Elias, her voice was hoarse. They were looking for me. He placed his hands on the back of the nearest chair, keeping his voice calm. I guess so. We have to go now, she cried out with a panic Elias had never seen in Marin's eyes. If they see me here, they won't let you off the hook. I don't want you dragged into this. Elias stepped closer, close enough for her to see the certainty in his eyes. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. If you're here, your business is my business. Marin shook her head repeatedly. No, I've already gotten too many people involved. I can't let that continue. You didn't implicate me, Elias said slowly and clearly. You never did. Marin looked at him for a long time. A very old fear rose up. It came from places she had been, from locked rooms, from accusing eyes, from voices shouting that she was unstable. It made her want to run, even before her legs started to ache. Elias noticed. He took a half step back, giving her room to breathe. Marin, can you tell me why someone is hunting you? If I understand, I can protect you better. She sat down in the chair, her hands shaking as she placed the folded napkin on the table. There was a long silence before her voice rang out, soft and tired. I saved a child. Her name is Hazel. She was living with her family. It wasn't safe. I managed to get her out of there and take her to the hospital. But they accused me of kidnapping, slander, and causing trouble. Elias looked at her, no judgment in his eyes. They make up stories to cover up their own mistakes? He asked. Marin nodded. They had money and connections. They wanted me gone so the story wouldn't spread. I ran because I knew I couldn't win against them. But Hazel was safe. That was enough. Or so I thought. A tear fell onto the back of her hand. She seemed to be fighting off guilt for leaving the place she had held so dear for so long. I thought they would let it go, but they didn't want to. They wanted to take back control. And now they're coming. Elias was silent for a moment, not out of surprise. But because he could clearly feel the despair Marin had carried all this time, she endured everything in silence, just as he had endured his own pain. Elias pulled the chair closer, but kept enough distance so she didn't feel pressured. Marin, listen to me. People can twist things, but they can't change the fact that you saved a child. You did not commit a crime. She laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. The truth does not protect me, Elias. It never did. Those people are coming, Elias said softly. But we are not running away, not out of defiance, but because I believe you deserve to be heard. Enough. You have run away enough. Marin lifted her face, her eyes shining with barely concealed pain. If I were here, they would hurt you. Elias shook his head, his voice steady without any hint of impatience. I have lost everything. I will not lose anything more just because I am afraid of others. If you leave now, you will keep running. I do not want that for you. A deep silence suddenly filled the room. The fireplace let out a small crackle as if to mark the important moment. Marin covered her face with her hands. Not to cry, but to breathe. For the first time since arriving, she felt something like confidence return to her chest. She whispered, "Do you really believe me? Every word you say." Silence. But this time, the silence didn't suffocate her. It was like the thick mountain air was embracing her. Late in the afternoon, Elias went to check the cabin entrances. He didn't lock them, as one might do if he sensed danger. Instead, he just bolted them and stood for a long time on the doorstep, looking down the dirt road that led up the mountain. Marin stood behind, her hand gently holding the scarf. "Do you think they will come soon?" she asked. "Maybe, but we won't let them decide your future." She looked at Elias's broad back and felt something budding inside her. Not dependence, not something that made her want to hide without thinking, but respect and trust for someone who wouldn't leave her when she knew her darkest things. Marin stepped up and stood beside him. The wind blew over them, not as cold as before. "I'm scared," she said honestly. "I know. I'm scared too." She turned to look at him in surprise. "Afraid of what? Afraid that you will think I'm not worth protecting?" Marin was speechless for a long moment. Then a sigh escaped her chest, as if she had let go of a burden that had weighed down her for years. "Thank you, Elias." He nodded slightly, his eyes looking down at the dirt road. "As long as their footprints remain on the ground, they will return. But next time, I will stand between them and you." A warmth crept into Marin's heart. Not dependence, but the confidence of someone learning to stand up again. On the edge of the forest, the rustling of pine branches sounded like the first warning from the mountains. But for the two people standing in the small cabin, this was the moment they knew their escape was over, and for the first time, Marin didn't want to hide anymore. Night fell on the highwood ranges in a thick darkness that crept into the rocks like a mountain sigh. Elias knew they had little time. Pursuers would surely return. No one came up the mountains just to leave. The best way to keep Marin safe was to leave the cabin before they were surrounded from multiple sides. Marin prepared her small bag, her hands tense as if she were holding something fragile. She said nothing, but her eyes showed that her mind was reeling from years of fear. Elias saw it. He came to her side, placing his hand on the saddle so she could see his composure. "We'll go through Coyote Rim," Elias said evenly. "That's harder to find. It'll take them a while to pick up the trail." Marin nodded slightly. "Are you sure we should go now? You can't face them in this little cabin. The ravine will hide your tracks. And I know every rock there. You'll be safer moving." Marin didn't argue. She knew how much she trusted him when faced with the choice of running or being caught. As they left the cabin, the wind carried the scent of damp pine and the dust of crushed snow, filling the air with an eerie silence. Elias's horse walked slowly down the path, barely wider than a footpath, hidden in the shadow of the deep woods. Marin sat behind him, clinging lightly to his coat, but not tightly enough to give her the sense of security she so desperately needed. As they went deeper into the forest, the firelight from the rear cabin faded until there was only a small, dust-like point of light in the darkness. Marin suddenly whispered, "I hate to leave it there." "It's okay," Elias replied. "We'll come back when it's clear." "Do you believe that day will come?" "I believe because you deserve such a day." The horses walked in a steady pace. The wind touched their shoulders like the cold hand of the mountains testing the men to see if they had the courage to continue. As they neared Coyote Rim, the trail narrowed so much that the horses had to tread carefully. On either side were sheer cliffs. Above, the moon hid behind a thin layer of cloud, leaving only a silvery glow on the rocky edges. Marin clung to the saddle as a rock fell somewhere in the distance. "Elias, can they find us?" "Maybe, but not as fast as us." She was silent, but her breathing was less rapid than before. Elias's way of speaking always had a rhythm that helped the listener cling to a sense of stability. It didn't immediately strengthen her, but it was enough to keep her from slipping back into her old fears. As the ground began to rise further, Elias stopped his horse. He turned to look down at Marin. "We will walk this part. The gap is too narrow for horses to pass." Marin dismounted, her legs trembling slightly from the steep and cold road. Elias took the reins and walked ahead. She followed, step by step, over the uneven rocks and half-footed ground. It was so quiet here that you could hear the sound of rubble falling into the abyss. Marin swallowed, her palms damp. "Elias, are you afraid of heights?" "I'm used to it," Elias replied. "But if you're nervous, just look at my back. No need to look down." She did so, and strangely, every time she looked at his back, the trembling in her legs lessened. As they reached a wider area, Elias stopped to examine the small wound on his arm. Marin noticed the long scratch, blood seeping into his jacket. The blood had dried, but it was obvious he was in pain. "Did you get hurt looking at their footprints?" Marin asked. "This is nothing," Elias said, but his voice was a little heavier than usual. "Give me your hand," Marin said with unusual firmness. Elias did not argue. He held out his arm. Marin tore a piece of cloth from her pocket and slowly wiped away the blood. Her hand shook slightly, but her movements were careful. "You shouldn't have suffered like that without saying anything," Marin whispered. "I don't want you to worry." She paused. "I will always worry, because you're the only reason I'm still standing." Elias looked at Marin. Her pale blue eyes no longer held the same despair. There was something else. Just enough resolve to make him realize she trusted him in a deeper way. "Marin," Elias said, his voice low and sincere, "you have lived too long in fear, but you are not weak. If you were not strong, you would not have come this far." She bowed her head, but a glimmer of light appeared in the corner of her eyes. "I don't feel strong at all. A strong person is not one who does not tremble. A strong person is one who, even though trembling, still moves forward." She was silent, but her arm tightened the bandage. They stopped on a flat patch of ground big enough to make a small fire. Elias found some dry twigs, and Marin gathered more stones. As the fire grew, the wind blew through the cracks, causing the light to waver on their faces. Marin sat close to the cliff to avoid the wind. After a few minutes, she said softly, "Elias, I want you to know this. I don't want to cause trouble for anyone. I don't want you to face danger because of me." Elias placed the branch on the fire, watching the flames begin to grow stronger. "Marin, you are not the problem. The people chasing you are the problem." She bowed her head. "It all started because I saved Hazel. If you hadn't, that baby might not have lived," Elias interrupted softly but firmly. She looked at him, her eyes slightly wet. "Do you think I did the right thing?" "I think you're the only one who did the right thing." A long sigh escaped Marin's chest, as if she were putting down a part of her heavy pain. She looked into the fire, her voice a little lost. "I remember her. Hazel. She was scared, but she tried to smile at me before we took her to the treatment room. I promised her I would be okay, but I couldn't keep that promise." Elias placed his hand on the stone near the fire, the heat spreading across his hand. "You kept your word better than you thought. You lived on. That was keeping your word to Hazel." Marin covered her mouth, trying not to sob. The night in the canyon was so quiet, she could hear her labored breathing. She whispered, "I thought I was lost, but if you trust me, maybe I can start to trust myself a little." Elias tilted his head, his eyes soft and sure. "You're not lost again, Marin. Not while I'm here." The wind in the canyon died down, but there was an eerie stillness in the air. In the darkness, Marin knew that a part of her truth had been revealed. The fear of pursuers remained, but it no longer consumed her as it had before. She had stepped into a small, bright spot of trust. As the two sat by the fire, no one said anything more, but the silence between them was no longer a distance. It was like an invisible support, letting them both know that they were not alone in this increasingly difficult journey. The trail from Coyote Rim Creek down into the lowlands opened up to a wider landscape. The pine forest thinned out to dark slopes where dry grass lay pressed against the damp earth. Elias took Marin to Fort Layton because it was the closest place she could find someone who knew her story. If they were to end the chase, they had to find real evidence. The town felt many times bigger than Ash Willow Junction. The dirt roads were wider, the hooves of horses clattered, the sounds of people talking mixed with the smoke rising from the taverns. For Marin, the place was a maze of old memories and new tensions. She shrank back as her horse entered more crowded areas. "It's okay," Elias said, not turning around, but his voice low and full of assurance. "Just walk beside me." Marin nodded slightly. Her fingertips grew cold as the town grew noisier. Still, Elias's footsteps seemed to keep her breathing from falling into a constant panic. They stopped in front of a large wooden house with a faded sign. Elias knocked. After a moment, the door opened. An old man with a white beard and sharp, tired eyes appeared. Marin let out a small gasp when she recognized the familiar face. "Dr. Calder," Elias said. "I need your help with something." Dr. Calder looked from Elias to Marin. He was surprised at first, then recognized her face. His gaze softened immediately. "Marin O'Rourke?" the doctor asked hoarsely. "Goodness, I thought you were out of this area." Marin bowed her head. "I don't think anyone can believe me anymore." Dr. Calder stepped aside. "Come in, both of you." They entered a house that smelled of old medicine and dried pine. The place reminded Marin of where she had worked. A memory swirled in her mind, and she tapped the table lightly, as if for support. Dr. Calder sat down in his chair. He looked at Marin for a long time before speaking. "Are they still after you?" Marin nodded. "I want to end this, but I can't do it without someone knowing the truth." Calder's old eyes were sad. "You saved Hazel. I saw it. The child lives because of you." Marin pressed her lips together. Her hands clenched in her lap, causing her shoulders to shake slightly. Elias spoke, his voice warm but firm as a wooden post driven into the ground. "We need you to testify. Without your word, the truth will be distorted again." Dr. Calder sighed deeply. "I wanted to stand up for you, but that family is powerful. I was afraid of hurting others." Elias looked at him without reproach, just calmly. "Now is the time to choose again." The silence stretched. The oil lamp cast shadows on the wooden roof in dark and light curves. Marin sat still as a statue, not knowing if she dared to hope, because she had felt hope taken away too many times. Finally, the doctor said, "I will testify. I cannot let a child's lifesaver fall into the wrong hands again." Marin blinked, her eyelids fluttering as if a strong wind had blown her. "I owe you," Marin whispered. "No, Marin. It's people like you I owe a debt to." That same afternoon, they went to Fort Layton City Hall. It was built of large stones, so sturdy that it seemed to overwhelm anyone who entered. Marin stood at the bottom of the steps, her heart pounding as if she wanted to run away. But Elias stood next to her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, not pressing her, just as a reassurance that she was not alone. The heavy wooden door opened. Inside was a large room, filled with strange glances, clashing like invisible whispers. At the back of the room, a line of family representatives had been chasing her. Their eyes on Marin were etched with the same old menace. She suddenly felt her throat tighten. Her breathing hitched. Elias lowered his voice, loud enough for only she to hear. "Just stand next to me. I'm here." The fear didn't go away, but Marin stood straighter. She wasn't cowering like before. The interrogation began. The first man's voice was as cold as a knife. "Marin O'Rourke, you are accused of kidnapping a child, setting fire to a medical facility, and fleeing from responsibility." Marin heard each word like stones thrown into her memory. But this time, she wasn't alone. "That accusation is false," Marin said clearly, not loudly, but not shakily. The room was silent for a few seconds, as if not waiting for her to retort. "What proof do you have?" the other asked. Before Marin could answer, Dr. Calder stepped forward. "I do." The gaze turned to him. Dr. Calder, who had lived most of his life by medical ethics, straightened his back as if this were the last righteous act he needed to do in his life. "I was the one who took Hazel in that night. She was badly injured from abuse. Marin didn't kidnap anyone. She brought her in to save her life." Murmurs arose. A few looked away. The accusations of power were shaken. The man on the other side pressed his voice. "Are you saying that to cover up the fact that she caused the fire?" Dr. Calder shook his head. The fire started in the treatment room due to the carelessness of the staff. It had nothing to do with Marin. "I was there. I know." The atmosphere became tense. Everyone looked at Marin. Elias took half a step forward, his voice ringing clearly. "She doesn't have to run away anymore. If you want to arrest anyone, you should arrest the people who abused an innocent child." Several people in the room bowed their heads. The expressions of the family's entourage changed, but the truth had been told. Marin stood still. Tears did not fall, but gathered silently in the corners of her eyes. But this time, they were not tears of fear. They were tears of relief that reached the depths of her soul. The meeting ended with the town hall deciding to clear Marin of all charges. The men who came to hunt her were asked to leave town pending a new investigation into the Hazel incident. As she stepped out of the building, Marin paused on the stone steps. She looked up at the open sky before her shoulders slumping as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Elias stood by, saying nothing. He knew that great things need not be spoken. Finally, Marin turned to him, her eyes brighter than ever. "I thought I would never be free. But now, I feel like I can breathe again." Elias nodded slightly, his hand on her back, warm as a promise. "You are free now, Marin. From now on, you choose your path, not running. Walking, believing that all charges had been dropped, was like a door opening onto a new path. However, returning to Ash Willow Sixtige Junction still felt like crossing a shaky bridge. Not because she was still afraid, but because the change was too great for her heart to keep up. Elias observed Marin's silence, understanding that she was trying to re-establish herself, like someone who had just emerged from a storm and was still not used to the clear sky. Ash Willow Junction loomed over the horizon with the quiet of a small mountain region. Smoke from the chimneys curled gently between the wooden roofs, mingling with the thin sunlight to create a hazy mist. When Elias's horse stopped in front of the cabin, Marin stared silently at the familiar wooden door. What had once been a place of refuge now held a different meaning. Not just a place where she was protected, but a place where she was treated as someone of value. Elias dismounted first, then held out his hand. Marin took it, the firm feel of his hand helping her dismount. They didn't speak. It was just a light touch, but Marin felt a warm glow inside her, as if a small fire had been rekindled. Inside the cabin, everything was as they had left it. Elias's coat hung on a hook. His notebook lay on the wooden table, as if he had left it there for their return. Marin looked at it all with a strange sense of familiarity, yet like she was looking back at her life through a new window. Elias poured her some water. "Marin, if you want to leave this place after everything is over, I will help you." Marin's heart clenched at the words. He wasn't holding her back or forcing a choice. It was that tolerance that made her choke. "Do you think I should go?" Marin asked softly. Elias looked straight at her, his eyes calm but filled with deep concern. "I think you deserve the freedom to choose your path. No one should decide for you anymore." Marin clenched her glass. She had dreamed of freedom, but now it confused her. She asked herself what she truly wanted, and an old fear loomed, whether she had the right to pursue something new, something not based on escape or defense. She put down her glass. "I don't want to leave this place. Not yet." Her voice was small, but clear enough for Elias to understand. He nodded. "I'm glad to hear that." A warm silence spread between them, like the heat from a wood stove. It was not an awkward silence, but the peace of two souls that had weathered a storm and were getting used to the light. But Ash Willow Junction was more than just a cabin. As Marin walked down the road into town, she couldn't help but feel nervous. People here had looked at her with suspicion, whispered false stories. How would they look at her today? The first person they saw was Maeve Turner, the grocer. She happened to be sorting through bags of flour when she turned around. She paused and looked at Marin for a few seconds. Marin took a deep breath, preparing herself for anything. But Maeve smiled gently. "You are stronger than I thought. Glad to have you back." Marin was so surprised that she couldn't even reply. Elias nodded slightly to Maeve as a thank you on Marin's behalf. Maeve put a hand to her heart. News from Fort Layton traveled quickly. "Many already know the truth. You owe no one an explanation." Those words to Marin were like someone gently undoing the final lock that had been tightening around her heart. For the first time, Ash Willow Junction felt like a place she could call home. She bowed her head in thanks. "Thank you." "I never thought I would hear that." Maeve smiled wider. "People here see the good guys. It just takes time. And you have time, right?" Marin turned her gaze to Elias. He was looking at her too, his gaze calm, yet warm enough to make her heart skip a beat. And she knew the answer from that moment. In the afternoon, they walked back to the cabin. A gentle wind blew through the pine trees, carrying the pleasant smell of sap and damp earth. Marin walked beside Elias, sometimes their fingers accidentally touching and then separating as if the pace was unfamiliar. Marin's heart echoed with many nameless emotions, both light and strong, both scared and excited. Elias remained calm as usual, but his breathing was deeper than usual, as if he was holding back something he did not dare say too soon. As they approached the cabin, Elias stopped. "Marin, there is something I need to say." She turned, bracing herself for something important. "Go ahead." Elias placed his hands on the railing, his eyes looking out into the empty woods. "I know you've been through a lot. I know your heart is still broken. But Marin, I want you to know that I'm here, not out of obligation or responsibility, but because I truly want to see you live the life you choose." His voice was a little hoarse than usual, but steady. "If one day you want to move on, I hope I can walk by your side." Marin stood still. In that moment, the memories of the days of running away, the moments of fear, the feeling of the whole world turning its back on her, all melted into a thin layer of mist. She looked at the man in front of her, the man who had never forced anything on her, who had never wanted to possess her. He only wanted to accompany her. It was something she had never had before. She stepped closer, just a little. "Elias, I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know I don't want to be alone anymore." Elias looked at her for a long time. "That is enough. No need for more words, no need for a hasty kiss. Just an understanding that can be shared by the eyes." The next day, Marin opened the cabin door, letting a pale yellow light wash over the wooden floor. She placed her hand on her heart. where for the first time in years, she felt free from its beating. She took out the bag containing the unsent thank you note to Hazel. The unfinished letter would now be completed, not to escape the past, but to begin a new journey. Elias entered behind her, carrying 2 cups of herbal tea. "We'll be fine, Marin." She took the cup of tea, her eyes soft as petals. "Yes, we'll be fine." In the small space of the cabin in the woods, the silence seemed to smile. Marin's new life began not with cheers or bright lights. It began with the simplest thing, being herself in a place where no one would call her something she was not. Being loved not out of pity, but because she was worthy of being loved. And Elias, the mountain man, was not only the one who saved her from danger, he was the one who helped her believe that in this vast world, everyone has the right to find a place to return to. The stories of Elias and Marin remind us that, despite the storms in life, we can still find peace if we dare to open our hearts at the right time. People are not only strong in what they have overcome, but also in their ability to choose to live kindly in a world that is sometimes too cruel. We have all suffered unspeakable pain, but like Marin, the pain is not the end. It is just the beginning of another journey, the journey of standing up on our own, confidently stepping into our own light. And sometimes, a small choice by someone like Elias, to believe in the goodness in others, can change their lives. This story doesn't teach us to be strong, but it does remind us that kindness has a deeper healing power than anything else. Thank you for listening to this journey to the end. If this story touches your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us continue to bring you more human stories.